Sarah Hawkes first travelled to China 40 years ago this year, and exactly 60 years after her grandfather lived there in 1922. As they celebrate this double anniversary, this is the tale of one English family and their century with the Middle Kingdom, as witnesses to its transformation and as first-hand participants in its incredible story.
I think what really interested me was that I had grown up listening to stories of China. My grandfather had been in China in the 1920s, 1922 to 1924, and he was full of stories of his time in China. So when I won the trip to Hong Kong and realized just how close I was to being able to visit this fabled land that I'd heard so much about, I took every opportunity. Here I was in a land that was completely unknown to me. I mean, I had some idea about what to expect because obviously, we had television, we had newspapers, we could see something about what was happening in China. But I really had no idea what awaited me the other side of the border. Even going to Hong Kong in 1982 was a huge adventure for me, was very much a foray into a very foreign environment for me as a girl from Basildon, Essex.
In 1982, Sarah won a national essay competition, and the prize was a plane ticket to Hong Kong, a city separated from the rest of China by almost 150 years of empire and colonialism. When I think about it, there's something brave and magical about a young person stepping into the unknown, especially at a time of fear and suspicion that divided understanding in the global East and West.
What I remember when crossing the border was, first of all, it was agricultural. So it felt like we were very much going into an agrarian land. I had travelled to Hong Kong with Miss British Airways, and Miss British Airways was not allowed to come into China. So when I announced to Miss British Airways that now I was so close, I really needed to go into China, she said I had to sort it out for myself. I found a tour company, I got the visa arranged and joined a group that was indeed walking across the border into a land where we didn't know what to expect. I do remember just feeling really hot all the time. This was clearly the days before universal air conditioning. It was a hot, sultry, sweaty August. What really struck me was the sight of people reading newspapers stuck to walls. So daily newspapers would be contained behind glass. Just watching people reading the newspapers on the street was something incredibly eye-opening for me. Watching people in parks playing, lines and lines of elderly men playing mahjong, and some of them playing what looked to me like chess. People exercising in the open air, people going about their daily business without many cars. At that point, the streets of Guangzhou were predominantly full of bicycles. Even the first time I went to Beijing in a few years later, the streets were streets full of bicycles. The understandable part of it that here was a country that had not yet reached a level of industrialization compared to the countries I'd grown up being used to. It was really clear that this was a country not standing still. It was extremely different to the Hong Kong I'd just left behind. Hong Kong, even in those days, was this incredible metropolis, full of excitement, full of neon lights, full of consumer goods. I do remember being completely entranced by that sense that here was a world of future possibilities. And then crossing the border into a very rural, agrarian setting.
It was not only bicycles that piqued the interest of this English schoolgirl. Rail travel formed the backbone of China's development, eventually evolving into the high-speed bullet trains we see today. The trains gave Sarah a chance to see the country through a glass window and an opportunity to interact with people who were just beginning to come into their own.
What I really remember meeting is people my own age, not just on the trains, but every time I took a walk in a town or a city, young people would approach me with notebooks and books and want to practice their English. Let's say I was going for an afternoon walk and they would come up and we would make an appointment time to meet at 6 p.m. so we could have an hour of them practicing their English. So just constant interaction with people, really, really desperate to learn and communicate in English with people speaking the language as their first language. So enormous openness and welcoming from a whole variety of people in every city I went to, with people really very keen to interact. It's because the country had at that point only really been open for a very short amount of time, open to foreign travel. People hadn't necessarily met too many foreigners at that point in time. I mean, the same way that, in the town I grew up in, I didn't meet many people travelling from mainland China to come and visit my town.
For many decades, China had been closed off to the world. Now it was opening up. Ideas and possibilities burst wide open, and as the lives of millions of ordinary Chinese began to improve, Sarah was there to witness this transformation.
So, there was a sense that here's somebody a bit different. But I really felt that it was because that generation really felt like they needed to be able to communicate with the rest of the world in a way that they hadn't been doing for a number of decades up till that point. So everybody was desperate to practice their English at that point. This was a country still incredibly rural, but what you would start to see is starting to see the beginnings of building programs really happening. On the outskirts of towns, you would start to see more construction happening. But inside, between the cities, just a huge memory of just field after field after field of agriculture.
In my next video, Sarah Hawkes talks about her grandfather's journey to China 100 years ago this year, and the start of an adventure that would shape the rest of his long life.
Please give a warm welcome for James Chau.
I'm James Chau, host of the China Current, with a glimpse into tomorrow's world and stories about the human experience everywhere.